Hello everyone, this is an instructional video about how to answer a political ideologies question. So first we're going to start off by talking about where you'll find these questions on the actual question paper themselves. So a liberalism question will be on paper 1, component 1, and it will be the third question that appears on the question paper. Now, for a political ideologies question, you'll have a choice between two 24-mark questions, and they are to be written within half an hour, 30 minutes. Now, we will be studying three core political ideologies: conservatism, liberalism, and socialism. It could well be that those two questions are both on one ideology. So even though you'll be learning three political ideologies for this paper, it might well be that only one of the ideologies turns up, but it will come up talking about different things. Now, all of the political ideologies questions will start off with the same stem. To what extent? So you'll be looking at where these political ideologies agree with one another, where they disagree with one another. You'll never be asked about where conservatives and liberals agree and disagree. There'll be no crossover questions in that sense. So as we're looking at liberalism, we're going to be looking at to what extent classical and modern liberals agree with one another, and today's one will be on society. Now, it's worth remembering as we go through this that if we don't talk about where they agree as well as where they disagree, you can't get higher than level 2 out of the 5 levels. Now, you don't need to write a long introduction for this type of question. In fact, you don't really need to write one at all. It's the main purpose of an introduction for this sort of question, or any question, is to make sure that you actually answer the question, tell the examiner what it is that you feel. That is the most important thing that you do. If you don't have that, it's not really worth writing an introduction at all. Now, the penultimate point to make before we get started is that with all our essay questions, including the 30-mark ones that we've already done, you need to write 3 main body paragraphs followed by a conclusion. And your conclusion needs to make sure that it says what you think. So it should really be a repeat of what you said in your introduction. And it needs to be substantiated. So you need to explain how you got to your view. The last thing to say is we need to make sure that we are using those key thinkers. So there are 5 key thinkers. We need to make sure that we use at least 2 at some point in our answer. It doesn't need to be in every paragraph, but you do need to mention at least 2 at some point. And you can't just name drop them. You need to make sure that you build them into your answer. So let's just remind ourselves what the core ideas and principles of liberalism that we've already been looking at home. So the first one is individualism, and this is the idea that all humans have the same capacity to reason and the same capacity to transform their own lives, and that they should be at the centre of all the decisions that the state or government, they mean the same thing, make. And as we will be looking at later, there is disagreement between modern and classical liberals on this idea. So even though they all agree in individualism, classical liberals believe in egoistical individualism, whereas modern liberals believe in developmental individualism, and we'll talk about what those differences are again later. The second core idea or principle is freedom or liberty. They mean the same thing. And this is the idea that individuals should have the freedom to make choices that impact their own lives. There are some limits to that freedom, particularly if it impacts another person's freedom. But this is probably the most important term in liberalism, the idea of freedom and liberty to have a religion or have no religion, to do what you want to do with your life, really, to marry who you want to marry, to choose a career that you want to have as well. The next term is rationalism. This is the belief that all individuals are capable of making reasoned decisions. Now, what this means is it's a rejection of the ideas of conservatism, really. Conservatives believe, that's conservatives with a small c, that by and large humans make decisions through emotion, anger, superstition, tradition, whereas liberals reject most of that, or not completely, but they will say that humans are capable of making reasoned decisions through debate, deliberation with others, and reasoning things through using logic. That's why they emphasize the importance of education so much. The penultimate core idea is equality. This is not absolute equality like socialists believe, well, some socialists believe. It's a belief that all humans are born equal. That is the idea of foundational equality. So whether you are black, white, male, female, Jew, Christian, everybody is born equal. They also believe in something called formal equality, where nobody should be discriminated against. So no matter who you are, there should be laws in place to protect you, to prevent discrimination against you, no matter your age, sexuality, religion. They all encourage this idea of equality of opportunity, which we'll talk about later. And lastly, they all believe in liberal democracy. We won't be talking about this too much today, but it is worth remembering that liberals believe that the state should be limited. It should have a minor role in people's lives. The state should treat everybody equally. It should make sure that our rights and our freedoms or liberties are protected. That's why they believe in a separation of powers, checks and balances between the different parts of government, a constitution, things like that. Think of America. Right, so the question that we're going to be looking at today is, to what extent are classical and modern liberals in agreement over society? So I'm just going to pose some questions before we move on. I want you to consider the following three questions. For liberals, is society more important than the individual? For liberals, would they say that we should welcome inequality or try to enforce a form of equality in society? And lastly, how would liberals argue that society should be structured? So you might want to pause the video now and have a little think about that, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, just to go over those questions before we do move on, liberals do not believe that there is really anything more important than the individual. The individual is paramount in society. That's why they believe in rights and freedoms being protected. That second question there, liberals believe that we should welcome some levels of inequality. Although they do believe in equality of opportunity, some people are more able than others. Some people are harder workers than others. And some people have just that are more sort of get up and go than others. They believe in a meritocracy after all. And lastly, they don't believe in a conservative idea of structure in society. They don't believe that they will be leaders and sort of rulers and ruled. They don't believe in this idea that you are born into a fixed place in society. They reject those conservative ideas. That's what liberalism is all about ultimately. They believe that you get to where you are in life because of your merit. Again, going back to that idea of a meritocracy. So all of these ideas we'll be coming back to. So let's have a little look at how we might break down our three paragraphs. So these hands here represent the two sides of the debate. Now, all liberals believe in individualism. We mentioned this earlier, so I'm not going to talk about it too much more now. However, just as a reminder, it basically means that individuals are more important than any social group. They reject the idea of working class, middle class, upper class that we see in socialism. And they reject the idea in conservatism of having rulers and ruled, having fixed structures in society. So they reject that. Now, classical liberals, on one hand, believe in an atomistic society. This is the idea that society is a collection of self-interested individuals who act in their own interest. Now, I've got the key thinker Locke here, who basically said that individuals should be able to use their reason to decide how they want to live their lives. And because everybody is using their own reason, their own logic, they will realise that it's reasonable for them to not want to negatively impact other individuals. That's why people aren't violent towards one another, because it's not in their interests in the end. So although, yes, we are atomistic, we are loosely connected, according to classical liberals, we do have to work together to a certain extent. It's in our own interests. So for Locke, for example, we would form a social contract, come together, form a state, form a society that's in our best interests, and we might take away our consent from that state or society if it doesn't work in our interests. We might choose a different government through elections. Now, it's worth talking about now, on the other hand, when we talk about modern liberals build on the ideas of classical liberalism. They don't reject those ideas, they build on them. So really, we're not ever going to be talking about a complete rejection. We're not going to be arguing that they do not agree at all, because modern liberals build on classical liberal ideas. So when it comes to individualism, modern liberals believe in developmental individualism, whereas classical liberals believe in an atomistic society or egoistical individualism where humans are acting in their own self-interests. Modern liberals believe in the common good, developmental individualism. These were the ideas that were sort of first created by John Stuart Mill. And this is the idea, this is why he emphasised the importance of education so much, is that for us to realise our potential, we need to be able to work with one another. The protection of our rights, freedoms, and our development as human beings depends on other people. So students depend on teachers, for example. It's also worth bringing in here John Rawls, another key thinker, because he said that ultimately a just society is one where people will work together, because we won't want a society where there is deep poverty. It's not in our interest, but also it's not a just society. So he, as we will talk about later, does talk about trying to reduce inequality. Not get rid of it, but reduce it. More on that later. Now, our next paragraph, we will talk about how all liberals believe in the protection of rights and liberties. So rights and liberties are things like the freedom of speech, to say what you want to say, to criticise your government, if you want to, without fear of any reprisals. It's also about the idea of freedom of religion, having no religion, and to live your life as you want. So it's all about really protecting people's ability to make choices in their lives. You may choose to not have a religion. You may choose to have a career path that's different to perhaps what your family have had in the past. And liberals say that that is your choice. It's about freedom. Now, on one hand, classical liberals believe in negative freedom or negative rights. They believe that freedom means where you are free from constraints, where society is not limiting or telling you what to do. Now, I've got two thinkers here. Mary Wollstonecraft could come in here because we could talk about how she argued that because women have the same capacity to reason as men, they are deserving of the same freedoms as men, and they should be allowed to make their own choices about how they live their lives, who they get married to, for example. Now, for John Stuart Mill, who's there as well, we might bring in the idea of Mill's harm principle. This is the idea that pretty much people should be allowed to do what they want to do, so long as it doesn't impact somebody else's freedom. On the other hand, we could talk about modern liberals, like Betty Friedan. Now, they believe in positive freedom, positive rights, and they argue that true freedom is the ability to grow and achieve our goals. And we can't do that in isolation. We can't do that simply being free from other people. They would go as far as saying being free from the state. In fact, they would argue that the state has a role to help us to reach our goals through giving us education, providing us with healthcare so that we're not sick, because then that gets in the way of us growing and developing. Now, Betty Friedan is a good example to bring in here. Now, she's a liberal feminist, and she argued that women cannot develop and reach their goals simply by being free from constraints. It's not enough to simply have laws in place to get rid of discrimination, because there are clearly other things in the way of women realising their potential. They need to be educated in the same way as men. They need to be offered the same opportunities as men to go into government, to go anywhere they really want to in the workplace. And that simply is not going to happen just by having laws in place that prevent discrimination. We need to work together. In particular for Betty Friedan, she argued that we need to change how we view the role of women, what their role is in the family. They shouldn't be just seen as the child rearer. They shouldn't simply be seen as a person who does the cooking and the cleaning at home. They should be seen as people who have the same potential as any man. So she's very much in agreement with Mary Wollstonecraft and John Stuart Mill, to be fair, that women have the same capacity to reason as men. And so therefore they should be offered the same opportunities as them as well. So there's a large amount of agreement there, but positive freedom and rights talks about a greater role of the state, not just to pass laws, but to provide decent quality of education and maybe other welfare incentives to help people as well. Perhaps, for example, thinking about in recent times, a good example of positive freedom would be how the state is having an increasing role to provide childcare. That allows people to go to work and have careers, because very often, even today, many women will have to make that choice, or they will feel that they will have to make that choice between having a career or having a family. So hopefully you can see there how the state has a role to enable women to realise their potential. Now, our last paragraph is looking at equality. Now, all liberals believe that humans, as they are rational, should be able to create a state or government or society that reflects mankind's needs. This is Locke's idea of mechanistic theory. The idea that society or the state is like a machine and we can fix it, we can change it, because humans being rational, we might do that to a car engine, for example, and Locke argued you can do the same to the state. If something's not working in the state, we can change it. We can change our constitution. We can change our government through elections. Now, all liberals believe in that. And how this fits in with equality, well, classical liberals on the one hand believe in this idea of formal, equality of opportunity. That word formal means legal. They mean that laws should be in place to make sure that people aren't being discriminated against simply because of the colour of their skin, their religion, what have you. Now for Mary Wollstonecraft, as you can see there, she's a good example to bring in here because she was one of the early political philosophers who argued that there should be laws in place to prevent discrimination against women, for example. Like all liberals, they argue that there should be a meritocracy, and you can only really have a meritocracy if there are laws in place to prevent discrimination. As a quick reminder, a meritocracy means that you get to where you are in life, not because of privilege or because of family wealth. You get to where you are in life because of hard work, ability, and dedication. Now, all liberals, by and large, believe in that. And when we look at the other side of the debate, modern liberals build on those ideas. So again, they're not rejecting those ideas. They believe in a meritocracy and formal equality of opportunity too, but they develop it and say ultimately what they want is fair or substantive equality of opportunity. They argue that formal equality is not enough. It's not enough simply to have laws in place. If we want a just society where everybody can fulfill their potential and for there truly to be a meritocracy, we need to make sure that we reduce inequality. Now, I talk here about John Rawls. You might remember that one of John Rawls' most important arguments is a thought experiment called the veil of ignorance. As a quick reminder, what that basically argues is that he said, well, imagine you were going to be put into society. We were going to start again and we were going to not really know where we were going to be in that society. We were behind a veil of ignorance. We don't know whether, when we're put into society, whether we are white or black. We don't know whether we would be from a wealthy family or a poor family. We don't know what area of the country we would be born in, whether it would be a prosperous part of the country or whether it would be an impoverished part of the country. John Rawls argues that if you're behind that veil of ignorance and you don't know where you would be in society, it makes sense that you would want a just society. It makes sense that you would want a society where everyone, irrespective of your race, your religion, irrespective of what family you're born into or what geographical region you're born into, that everybody should have the same opportunities in life. If you don't know who you're going to end up being in that society, you don't want to end up poor. You don't want to end up in a difficult situation. So you want to make sure that there is a just society where everybody is protected. And so through that thought experiment, John Rawls argues that it's clear that we need to try and reduce inequality. Now, what I want to really emphasise here, this is quite a common mistake that students make, is that John Rawls, like all liberals, believes that there is a place for inequality. Some students will argue that John Rawls is a socialist. He's not, because ultimately he says that, there isn't a role for inequality in life. It goes back to the idea of a meritocracy. He argues that there can't really be a meritocracy if everybody is absolutely equal. Where is the incentive, he would argue, to work hard at school, in the workplace? Where would be the drive if you know that everybody's going to end up equally anyway? So he's arguing to reduce inequality rather than eradicate it entirely. And hopefully you can see then, therefore, that most liberals are in agreement here when it comes to equality. Now, when you're writing your answer, you need to think about AO1, AO2, AO3. Now, AO1 is what I've just been yabbering on about. It's the content. AO2 now is thinking about comparative language to build up those analysis marks. So this is where we're talking about comparing and contrasting. Now, you've got some examples of some sentence starters there you might want to use when you're comparing. You might want to use phrases like both X and Y share the view that. In this case, both classical liberals and modern liberals share the view that, and that helps you to start thinking about what they agree on. Students really struggle about thinking about what they agree on. So it's really important that you start off each paragraph talking about what they agree on before you start talking about where their disagreements are. That's why we've been structuring our presentation like this so far. So you've got some other sentence starters there that you can use to introduce similarity. Now, as well as comparing, you need to be able to contrast as well. You need to be able to talk about where they differ. Now here, you might want to use the phrase X is different from Y because. So classical liberals are different from modern liberals because, and then finish off that sentence. And you want to be trying to use as many of these phrases in your paragraphs as possible, at least one each. So you can see what is said on both sides, both hands in this case. Now, when we're talking about AO3, this is very, very important. And in the past, thinking about previous exams and thinking about what the examiners have said about students across the UK as a whole, is that they really struggle to evaluate. Now, evaluate simply means making judgments. So you've got a thermometer here that I thought might help you to visualize this a bit. So if the question is to what extent are classical and modern liberals in agreement over society, you want to be using these phrases as much as possible. You want to be mentioning them at the end of each of your main body paragraphs and also in your conclusion. So do they agree to a major extent, significant extent, substantial, moderate extent, minor extent, or maybe not at all? Now, what I'd like to remind you is we really shouldn't be arguing that they don't agree at all. Otherwise, they're not liberals. What makes them liberals is that there will be some agreement amongst them. So let's talk about then how we would actually answer this question. Now, first of all, I'm just going to go through a paragraph with you. So you can see here we've got an example paragraph, and you can see on the left we've got our success criteria. So we are hoping that this student, and this is an example answer from a student in the past, we're hoping that this student has given a clear argument at the beginning of their paragraph. What are they going to talk about? We're hoping there's going to be some balance where they agree and where they disagree. We're hoping that there's going to be use of key terminology like freedom, liberty, the other words that we talked about like rights, meritocracy. We're hoping that they're going to be using at least one key thinker to help them use those key thinkers throughout their work. They are our examples, and we're hoping that there's going to be some evaluative language here as well. So you might want to pause this video, have a little look at this answer, and have a little think about what you think about this paragraph. Now, if we have a little look at it together, it's not perfect, but it does give you a bit of an idea of what we're aiming for. So it says classical and modern liberals' differing views on the concept of individualism impacts their attitude towards society. So we can see that they are talking about individualism in this paragraph. Now, what might make it better is to talk about from the very beginning of this paragraph, to what extent are they in agreement? Maybe changing it to use the words major extent, limited extent, great extent. It doesn't really matter. but it does really get across that this student was answering the question. So you might change that first sentence to say, there is a great deal of disagreement between liberals on society. There is a significant extent of agreement between liberals on their views towards individualism and their attitudes towards society. It's a minor tweak, but it helps you to answer that question and to show the examiner that you're answering the question. So it continues on then. In relation to an individualistic view on society, all liberals believe that individuals have unique abilities and interests. So they've talked about already where they're in agreement. However, classic liberals believe that the individual is more important than society as a whole. The concept of an atomistic society stems from the classical liberal view that society is no more than a collective of self-interested individuals who act in their own, not society's best interests. Right, so we can see that this student is using key terminology, and there is an element of balance coming through now because they've talked about where they agree. Now, this next sentence is where they start to use the ideas of key thinkers. This correlates to John Locke's idea of egoistical individualism, where people are concerned with their own personal pursuits and that they owe little or nothing to society, hence why an atomistic society exists. This differs substantially, so you can see here already this student is bringing in that balance. And because I've used that phrase, differs substantially, there is an element of evaluative language coming through. This differs substantially to the viewpoint of a modern liberalist on society. Modern liberalists believe in the common good, where self-realization is not possible in isolation and that our rights, freedoms and growth depend on other people. By working as a community, individuals are able to develop and achieve their potential. Therefore, liberals have different specific ideas on society. So, a good paragraph. But again, might make it even better by finishing up by saying basically what you said in the first sentence. Is there a major disagreement? What is the extent of that agreement? Great extent, limited extent, up to you what phrases you choose. Okay, that would just make the argument really nice and clear.